order. I'd like to first thank all of the committee members for being present this morning as the current status of agriculture in the state of Mississippi as well as the nation is one that we need to be paying very close attention to. So I'd like to thank the committee for their being here this morning. I also like to thank several people in the audience for being here, the speakers that have come in. We look for a very good dialogue and getting to some of the nuts and bolts of agriculture and the state that we're in right now. We have an agenda and we're going to kind of skip around on that agenda. So with the first speaker, I'd like Mr. Chris Graham with Mississippi DOR to please come forward and share with us a little bit about the taxing situation as far as sales tax and just whatever else you have to offer us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe you can hear me. I brought two handouts with me today. One is a bulletin that we put out that relates to sales taxes paid by farmers. Our general retail sales tax rate in the state of Mississippi is generally 7%. And so most things you go buy that you and I would go buy in the store, tangible personal property, would be taxed at 7%. You all have enacted a special rate for farm implements and farm tractors sold to farmers for agricultural purposes. And so this is our bulletin that we have put out describing what that tax reduction of tax is. There's some things that are exempt from taxation, some seeds and things like that for anybody who purchases them. And that's all explained in this couple page handout that I passed out. And the primary thing I wanted to come talk about is the funding side of the agriculture tax exemption. So what do we collect with the 1.5% that's taxed to agricultural products? And that's the one-page handout that I have for you all. It has some numbers on it. I thought at 9 o'clock this morning, I could try to put you all to sleep with numbers. And so what I've brought is a report that shows from fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2025, what the sales and use tax collections have been related to the agriculture sales tax exemption. So the 1.5% rate that's paid. And there are a couple of taxes that we collect. It's a sales tax and a use tax. And so if you buy something within the state, you're probably paying sales tax. If you buy something outside the state and bring it inside the state, you're probably going to be paying a use tax on it. And so I might refer to them all as sales taxes because you're doing it on the sale or use of the product. And you all will remember that as we collect sales taxes, if something is sold within one of our city limits, the sales tax doesn't all go to the general fund. And so this report shows you everywhere that those sales tax dollars go, and then also the use tax dollars. So if it's okay with the committee, I might just take fiscal year 25 and just tell you how it breaks out. So in fiscal year 25, we collected about $16 million in taxes overall, sales and use taxes related to the sale of the reduced rate to 1.5% that relates to farm implements. Of that $16 million, $1.8 million goes to the city diversion. And so anything bought within the city limits, 18.5% of whatever's collected on the tax side goes to municipalities. And so that's what that $1.8 million represents. The modernization diversion, which is the second row on the page that I gave you, was $916,000 last year, almost $917,000 last year. That's primarily going to be use tax dollars that come in. And so you'll recall when use tax dollars come in, cities get a piece of that, counties get a piece of that, and then transportation gets a piece of that. So the use tax dollars are divided amongst our counties, our municipalities, and then some transportation functions. So that 916 went to 3 different places at least. The Education Enhancement Fund, on all the sales taxes and use taxes we collect, there's a transfer that goes to the EEF fund, and your appropriators talk about that every year when they're funding education purposes. You know, they don't just fund education with general fund dollars, they use the Education Enhancement Fund. And so the sales of agriculture products generated about $1.5 million to education purposes last year. And then another one that's used, and I would have to check with the Legislative Budget Office to figure out exactly what they use this money for whenever they appropriate it. They appropriate it every year as the School Ad Valorem Tax Reduction Fund. So every sales tax dollar that's generated creates a diversion to the School Ad Valorem Tax Reduction Fund, which goes to your local school districts as well. And then finally, the last row on that sheet, we generated about $12 million, $11.7 million last year for the general fund related to agriculture sales tax exemption. So that's the reduced rate, 1.5%, created about $12 million for the general fund last year. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions the committee might have. I wanted to give you just an overview of what the sales tax generation for agriculture issues is.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. I've got a few questions to begin with. So after the diversions, the 11.7, that is what you're left over with that goes to the general fund balance that appropriated by the legislature each year. But within those diversions, the city diversion, the modernization diversion, you said that modernization is broken down three ways. Is that correct?
It is. Y'all have directed us how to disperse that money. I think of that 916, 35, and I could have the percentages wrong. I think 35% goes to counties, 35% goes to municipalities, and then another 15 or whatever the remainder would go to transportation purposes. Now, I may be wrong. I think that's the percentages we're up to now, 35%, and whatever the balance would be.
Okay, and one more question. The school ad valorem tax reduction fund, that $369,000.
Yes, sir.
In the future, can I get a little bit more information from you on that, just to how that's being implemented and what it actually is doing?
I can. That goes into a fund. It's available for the legislature for appropriation. And I think there are a couple of statutes that talk about what y'all will use those funds for. We're generally not involved on the appropriations process, but we
Right.
do send the funds where they go. But we can get you some more information on how y'all have used those funds and what the percentages are that go into that.
And one more question, and this is one that I've been trying to nail down and figure out. Local ad valorem tax, I know that's all set at the local level. Is there any avenue that we could look to see county by county how they set that local ad valorem and what that number actually looks like as far as ag land, the ag land portion of that?
I think we could get you some data on that. Yes, sir.
I would appreciate that
Okay.
very much. Thank you. Anyone with the committee for any questions? Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Do you know how many other states charge a sales tax on their ag equipment?
I did at one point, but I don't. I can get you that information. I'm not sure. Senator Younger, who's an expert in for all farming issues, says 7. Yeah.
So 7 states, as far as you know? Okay. Thank you.
I don't know. I wouldn't question Mr. McCormick's data. Yeah. We can double check it though.
Any further questions of the committee? Mr. Graham, we appreciate you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we're going to go to Mr. Ted Kendall. If you would, please come forward, and like to thank you for coming again. This is the second hearing we've had, and Mr. Kendall was he was at the first hearing and was supposed to speak, and time got away from us, so we're sorry for that, but we appreciate you being here today. So the floor is yours, sir.
One thing I can assure you that I won't make the time too long. I'll be brief, but thank you. Thank you, Chairman Whaley and members of the Senate Ag Committee for the invitation to be here today on behalf of Mississippi farmers. I see a lot of familiar faces out there and appreciate your interest in agriculture and in our state. As Chairman Whaley said, I'm Ted Kendall, here today on behalf of Mississippi Farm Bureau Federation, where I serve as Vice President for the central area of our state. I'm a 5th-generation family farmer from Western Hinds County. We grow cotton, corn, soybeans. We also run a commercial beef herd and grow both pine and hardwood timber. In addition to that, we operate a cotton gin and a general farm-related retail store. So our family's been involved in Mississippi agriculture since the late 1800s. And I'm here today to describe some of the current economic realities that farmers in our state are facing and to make some targeted policy recommendations to protect our farms and rural communities. And I want to first start with the current row crop economic realities. I asked the Ag Econ Department, Mississippi State, to put together some numbers for me and us here today that talk about the average expenses and returns on the 4 major row crops grown here in Mississippi. This chart is a compilation of practices across Mississippi that point out the economic reality that row crop farmers face this year and actually faced last year, and it looks like we're going to face again next year. Also included a study from earlier in the year that was done by Mississippi State that reflects some of the same numbers. These studies outline the fact that the cost to grow the four major crops in Mississippi far outweigh the returns this year and in the recent future. The corn numbers, $216 to $257 loss per acre. Cotton, close to $570 per acre loss. Rice, $157 to $302 per acre loss, and soybeans, $40 to $184 loss per acre. Of course, these numbers vary by farm and by region of the state, and by practices that the farmers use, but I think the message is that all of our row crops are being grown at a loss. A similar study that was done by the National Cotton Council projected that on a 3,000 acre Mississippi row crop farm, the negative net returns would range from $500,000 to $1.5 million, depending on the crop mix. Obviously, this is not sustainable. Recently, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, there was some legislation passed that made some improvements to the farm safety net. But unfortunately, due to the timing and the way that works, that help won't be coming until about a year from now. And that's going to be too late for many farmers. Last night, I was with a group of really good farmers in the Delta, and some of the conversation was they had made a really good crop, but still we're going to suffer a loss. So I think that points out that we can't yield our way out of this problem that we're in now. Why are the returns so weak? Commodity prices have fallen as abundant supplies and expanding U.S. acreage, along with trade disruptions and disputes, have driven markets lower. Since COVID, production costs have risen, along with a lot of other costs, at unprecedented rate and remain at near record highs. Mississippi State budgets show the total cost levels are among the highest on record for most enterprises. The result of these lower commodity prices and higher production prices is a severe margin squeeze that is affecting not only farmers, but translating through rural economies as well. Seed, fertilizer, chemical dealers, equipment sellers, repair shops, local retailers are also feeling the impacts. Market mechanics are playing a role as well. Global trade pressures, including expanding production in Brazil and Argentina, much of which is being funded by China, has increased market volatility and eroded price stability. China was in the not too distant past the overwhelmingly largest purchaser of U.S. soybeans. But this year, 2025, to my knowledge, they've not purchased a single soybean. So it's imperative that U.S. policy, both at the federal and state level, actively support and protect our domestic producers' competitiveness. So what are some of the on-farm impacts at our current economic situation? Farmers are delaying equipment purchases, reducing fertilizer and chemical applications, postponing needed repairs, cutting back on payrolls, and things such as that. All these measures not only affect the long-term productivity of a farm, but they negatively ripple through the local and state economy. Row crop farmers are not the only ones affected by our economic situation. Timber owners are feeling the effects of low prices and high costs as well, due to several factors. There is a lack of markets in many areas of our state, which raises the transportation costs of getting timber products to the mill, which are passed along to timber owner through lower bids and lower prices. Also, the decline in paper consumption has lowered the demand for small diameter timber, which makes it difficult to get much needed timber stand thinnings done. And more recently, a new regulation that's being proposed called the European Union Deforestation Regulation, which requires forest landowners to certify that they will replant harvested forest land to trees and not to convert to pasture or crops or other uses, will be a serious burden for forest owners and likely drive down prices as well. I was going to comment on the livestock markets. They have actually been kind of shining star in Mississippi this year. I was going to brag on Senator Berry and what he's done for the cattle markets, but with it, but within the last week, 10 days, due to some new policy proposals and some tweets from the executive branch, the cattle markets have plummeted, and I would assume they're still plummeting today. I haven't checked yet, but up a little. Okay, a little. Anyway, cattle markets have been good until very recently, and some of the others have as well. But with the economic situation we're currently facing, we do have some suggestions for practical, targeted solutions that Mississippi can enact now. We're not asking for broad, untargeted subsidies. Our preference as farmers would be to have fair market prices that give us a fair return, so we don't need to ask for policy adjustments. But as I stand here today, that is not the case. We need practical policy changes to reduce production overhead, improve market access and certainty, continue to strengthen our rural transportation infrastructure, and tax frameworks that keep farms viable. And we have some suggestions for some legislative consideration. One, to continue to make rural transportation investments a priority. Closed and low-weight bridges add to the cost of getting products to the market and lower the price received for those products. I did a little country math. A 30-mile detour around a closed or low-weight bridge adds approximately $180 per trip for a load of grain or logs. On a 15-load corn haul day, that costs $2,700. For a week, that's right at $19,000, so that adds up. Also, we'd like to adjust property tax assessment policy on productive farmland. Mississippi law bases ag assessments on use-based formulas, which is important and crucial to us as farmers. But rising taxes and inconsistent county practices add stress during low-income years. The legislature should review the income capitalization formula, the move-in average window, and assessor guidance to ensure that farmland continues to be valued by its productive capacity. We would like to protect and expand the reduced sales tax treatment for essential farm inputs that we heard about earlier. As was spoken, Mississippi currently applies a reduced 1.5% sales tax to certain farm equipment and repairs, but some producers still encounter uneven applications across vendors. We think the legislature hopefully could expand the items that are eligible and also consider a reduction to a 0% sales tax on some of these essential inputs. Also, in the tax area, we'd like to consider the tax treatment of federal farm and disaster payments. Some federal program payments, such as the Livestock Forage Disaster Program and the Emergency Conservation Program, are currently exempt from state income tax treatments. But other programs, such as the Market Facilitation Program we had several years ago and the ARC PLC programs, are taxable under state law. The legislature could consider a temporary state income tax exemption for those type programs for the next year or two. We'd like to make adequate funding for our state land grant institutions a priority. Farmers rely on non-biased information from our state-based research institutions to make cost-saving decisions when faced with cost-cutting measures that are caused by the state of the ag economy. We have an incredibly valuable resource in our scientists and extension personnel at these institutions that we cannot afford to lose due to lack of adequate funding. And then finally, we would like to look into ways to further enhance the values of the crops, timber, and livestock we grow in Mississippi. We've done a fantastic job, made giant strides in our state in attracting other types of industry. A focus on ag product processing expansion would be very beneficial. Out where I live and farm, I drive by the Continental Tire plant almost daily, and I actually farm some cotton right across the tree line from it. And I just think sometimes it's really neat to have something not that big, but something similar where maybe our cotton goes or soybean processing. So I think those are things we could think about. So why is legislative action, why does it matter now? As you can see, we're in a crisis in a lot of places. Agriculture is still the number one industry in Mississippi. It underpins county tax bases, local jobs, and community vitality. When farms fail, local payrolls shrink, retail purchases decline, and school and county revenues suffer. As the Mississippi State analysis highlights, the row crop sector of Mississippi agriculture is currently the epicenter of the economic crisis in our state. Some of the decisions made during the 2026 legislative session on transportation funding, property tax policy, sales tax relief, land grant funding, and adding value to our crops will determine whether some family farms in Mississippi can survive during this difficult period. Our ask is straightforward and sincere. It's for targeted, timely, and practical action so that the people that feed, clothe, and create shelter for our state and our nation can continue that tradition and do it in a way that continues to make Mississippi a great place to work and to live. Thank you for having me here today and for your commitment to Mississippi agriculture. I would welcome any questions and look forward to working with this committee to refine these recommendations so that they are both effective and administrable. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Kendall. I appreciate your testimony there and some of the points that you made and a few things that I'll hit on. I very much appreciate the point that you made about how the farmers are not asking for subsidies, how they're only wanting a fair shot at the market. I think that's a very big misconception within the general public that they think that farmers operate only on subsidies and they're only looking for bailouts. And that, in my opinion, is the exact opposite. So I appreciate you saying that. And also the part about how when the farms fail, how the local communities die and how much they depend on those farms. So I appreciate that. I'm going to hold some of my questions and allow the committee to ask the questions because I know they're going to have some. So with that, Senator Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kendall, you had mentioned about the need for some type of facility or a plant for cotton or soybean. I guess we can include corn in that too here in the state because we spend a lot of money on trucking to go somewhere. What type of facilities would you envision that
I don't know specifically, but I know all the soybeans in my area go to the Mississippi River and get on a barge and go somewhere else to be processed or used. And, I think about all the cotton we grow here. I do not have specifics, but would be glad to work with someone that maybe is a little smarter than me. But it just seems that we could do some things to keep some of the products that we grow in the state, further, enhance the value of them and create some more jobs to do some other things.
I'm certainly sympathetic to that as a cattle producer. Probably 8 or 99% of our cattle go right by your house on I-20 headed west. And so finding a market that we could further process here of any of our ag commodities would be welcome. So thanks for mentioning that.
Senator Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ted, appreciate you being here this morning. Don't you think our state needs more funding for bridges in the rural areas like where you live?
In my county, it is a major problem. I mean,
well, in my county,
not only are there low weight bridges, there are no bridges where there used to be bridges that don't seem to be going to get fixed. So yes.
Well, in my county, we have a bridge out and it's called Old Macon Road. And one of the stipulations on them replacing, this is just a concrete bridge. Well, they've got to get the okay from Archives and History. They got to get the okay from Wildlife and Fisheries. And what the HELL they have to do with either one of those on replacing a bridge, I'll never understand. But anyway, we're trying to get it replaced. And I think we're going to try to get more funding to help on rural bridges like that. And we also need to get rid of the sales tax, period. Thank you for being here.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Younger. And maybe we can talk to a good transportation chairman to help with some of those issues. Senator Ladner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on the soybean oil. It says renewable diesel, biodiesel. Do you know how much we're using in that department? Have we started that process?
I do not know. I would have to defer for someone else, but I do know that it is a big issue and there, a lot of efforts being made toward converting, soybean oil and using it in biodiesel. Yes.
So if we do end up going that route, that could save us tremendously from
It would-
the China aspect of it.
Well, yeah, and it would certainly create a bigger and better market for our soybeans that would grow.
Senator Ladner, I think a lot of those questions are going to be answered for you in upcoming.
Okay.
Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Mr. Kendall, thank you for being here. When you started, you're talking about row cropping and the negative return we've got on that. Is this indicative across the nation, or do we have any states that are on a positive rise with any of this?
I think it is indicative across the nation. One thing we found, our harvest starts earlier in the south, so we realize those returns sooner than they do north of here. But yes, it is indicative in row crop arena across the nation.
So this is not something that's just unique to us. It's something that we're seeing everywhere. Just that the market is really keeping the commodity prices low, which is, we're as efficient as anybody else at producing.
Yeah, it's not a Mississippi problem. It's a nationwide problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Once again, Mr. Kendall, I appreciate you coming forward and sharing with us. I'm sorry, Senator Seymour. You
Thank
almost
you, Mr.
got off.
Chairman. You was talking earlier about the reforestation contract. What is y'all's position as far as how legal that is for a foreign entity to tap you to make you replant, and 30 years from now, they're not guaranteeing that they're going to be here to?
Yeah, it's a major concern, and I know it's something we're looking into. I'm not sure if it's been enacted yet, but okay. Of course, it's aimed at forestry products that would go to the European Union, but in some instances, I think those mills are the only mills that are available to purchase timber. So it's a major issue.
And my last question, you was talking about the losses as far as involving the competitive market in the real world, but what is our losses that we're seeing, especially in your general geographic area of wildlife damage? That is a
something
damage that
I-
has no
I-
insurance.
It's usually topic number one for me, but I didn't talk about it today. But I will tell you that deer depredation is our number one pest trying to grow cotton and soybeans on my farm. And there are a lot of other farms where it's the same thing. Very controversial topic because you got deer hunted pitted against farmers, but deer depredation is our number one pest growing soybeans and corn. That's a fact. Not corn, soybeans, I'm sorry, and cotton.
Do y'all have any estimated loss numbers?
I would have to get that for you. I know we have to put up electric fences around most of our soybean and cotton crops, and that's $25 to $50 an acre. And then some of the other measures we use are, costly as well.
Well, I'm seeing pictures of farmers that are losing $250,000, not in just soybean, but other row crops
Sure.
that are, it's not sustainable, and it's an issue that you have no insurance, fallback on, right?
It's a major issue for sure.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Mr. Kendall, we appreciate you very, very much. Thank you.
for having me.
Next on the agenda, we have Mr. Ethan Lane, who's going to be joining us via video. He's the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Mr. Lane, can you hear us?
Yes, sir. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we'll open the floor to you.
It's my pleasure. You'll have to excuse me. It has been a fairly busy week in the U.S. cattle industry, and while Senator Berry asked me to appear, I think I know what the topic is, but a little bit of guidance on where specifically you'd like me to engage would be helpful.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I would appreciate very much if you would just talk about the cattle industry as a whole. Up until the last week, I think we had very, very much positive to talk about, but now there may be some uncertainties within the market. If you could kind of elaborate a
Yeah.
little bit on that and what the Cattlemen's Association's viewpoints are on that, please.
Yes. Yes, sir. That's easy. It absolutely has been a pretty tumultuous couple weeks in the cattle industry. I actually think for us to think about this properly, we've got to rewind a little bit to the last 6 or 8 weeks. And what we've seen is, a cattle market that I think everyone can agree has been pretty volatile anyway. We're experiencing extremely high prices for our animals, obviously, but we also have some pretty significant headwinds in the form of the looming New World screwworm threat that we've been dealing with since about this time last year, about Thanksgiving last year, when this really kind of broke loose. The opening and closing of the southern border, and the approximately 4% of feeder cattle total supply that comes across that border in an average year to fill bunk space in those feedlots seasonally throughout the Southwest and Texas, stemming that tide going back to when that border reclosed about February or March of last year and has remained closed since then. We also are in the midst of an administration that is very much rooted in communicating messages, building a little bit of anticipation around potential announcements. We know that those announcements, by and large, sometimes can be more substantive or less, depending on what they're trying to accomplish that day. And while none of that is really connected to the U.S. cattle industry, the lack of understanding of just how easy it is for outside forces to disrupt our market, whether that be the futures market or the downstream impact that has in leading the cash market, is very much misunderstood by the political component of the administration that's trying to accomplish other things, and we don't think has a specific axe to grind against the U.S. cattle industry. But the net result of that, whether that is the Secretary of Agriculture giving a speech somewhere and leading that speech by saying, big exciting announcement to come, more to come, stay tuned, we're going to be changing the game. There's now a growing understanding, but I think there has been a lack of understanding of just how impactful that can be to not just our producers, but the impact of managed money, fund money rolling out of those cattle contracts, and the impact that we are all very well familiar with, going back to the swings we saw during COVID, the dynamics we saw in the Holcomb fire before that, and the fact that the net result of that at every turn is, fund money exits the complex. We're stuck holding the bag and at the mercy of those prices that we are seeing. And I know all of you are hearing from your constituents, particularly in areas like the Southeast. Guys went to the sale barn last week, sold some cattle. They went back this week, and they're 300 ahead back of where they were. Nothing has changed in the marketplace that would change that price, other than that larger sort of question and doubt that's been placed over the market. What we're seeing fundamentally hasn't changed a whole lot. We are still at a 70-year low in cattle supplies. We are still experiencing extremely high demand for our product. While the president has made it clear he believes we're getting paid too much for our product, the fact is consumers are still showing up and buying it. And that's a reflection of quality. That's a reflection of the demand that's been built for a very long time by our producers across the country. While we're seeing them shuffle around in what they buy, where maybe they were buying more muscle cuts and steaks 6 months ago or 8 months ago, and they're now moving to some lesser cuts or more grind, they're staying with beef, and they're staying in that category. And that's an indication to us that while, yes, the prices are high, we do think that they're still finding value for money there, and they're still showing up. Our producers have obviously spent a lot of time looking at this, and the economic community as well. And I think the consensus continues to be that consumers will be the best indicator of when those prices are too high, by choosing differently and sending those market signals down through the supply chain. But our expectation would be that even when those signals are sent, that low cattle supply should provide our producers a really long run out there on the value of their animals. And that's a lot of sort of that, in our opinion, kind of less scientific and more sort of mental positivity that's needed for that herd rebuild to really start in a comprehensive way. We know that there are still headwinds that are throughout the economy. Money is still very expensive. Expanding the cattle herd right now is not a measure to be taken lightly. Producers are looking at that. And as you all know, any part of the country that calves out in the spring, those producers are making those decisions right now about whether to retain heifers, about whether to grow that operation, or whether this is the best money they're going to see for a while. A lot of that is based on whether they've got debt paid down. We're in the 4th year of a recovery here. But what we're seeing economically is that producers are just now starting to feel like we're in a recovery. And that's not an atypical reaction to see, from an industry that has been through an absolutely horrific market going through COVID and in the years after. So while we're all looking at this and saying, gosh, guys are getting a lot of money for their cattle, sure they are, but it takes a couple years for that to really feel like you're getting a lot of money for your cattle. And by the time you get to that point, you're out from underneath some of that debt, and maybe you finally swapped out that pickup, and maybe you've bought a new tractor or whatever other improvements you needed to do. So getting this messaging from the White House, which again, we know isn't necessarily directed at the U.S. cattle industry. The president's trying to accomplish some other things. But what we've tried to communicate to the White House, to Secretary Rollins and others is, you may not have intended it, but what you told every young producer in the country is, this is the best money you're going to get for your cattle right now, and you really need to take it and not retain those heifers. And that works at cross purposes, in our opinion, with exactly what we're trying to accomplish, which is allowing these guys to catch a gear and grow their herds and lean into that quality. So that's where we've kind of found ourselves. We're making an economic argument that we know is contained to one very small piece of a much larger global agenda by the president on the trade front, and one that we've been very supportive of. This industry is subject to a tremendous amount of non-tariff barriers. A lot of those are rooted in fear of the fact that, quite frankly, we raise a superior product in the U.S., and whatever market we go into around the world, we tend to dominate. So the president has a very big task ahead of him to navigate that. And we're hopeful that in his conversations this week, he'll be able to regain our access to China, which is costing our producers right now about $165 a head in carcass value. Because prices are high right now, that covers all manner of sins, right? If we were in a different part of the market, that $165 is all anybody would be talking about. So we're watching all of those dynamics at once right now. But I think the thing we keep coming back to is, even if we get to a point where the secretary decides to open the southern border, it's not necessarily going to be a market mover, because that flow of cattle will be very slow. The protocols at that border mean that's a 7-day crossing process at this point. So limited ports, limited bandwidth. Similarly with the imported Argentine trim that has been so often discussed. Argentina sent about 2.1% of the beef into the U.S. market last year. This would open them up to something like 2.5 or more. I think the upper end of what the secretary has said, and I was with her last night and she talked about this again, would be 80,000 metric tons as opposed to the 20,000 that's in that tariff exemption bucket that they're operating in right now. That, best we can tell from economics, would be about a 6 cent per pound reduction in consumer price of beef. So not a market mover for anybody. Our concerns with that are not necessarily the trim. If you know NCBA, love us or hate us, we are an industry that believes in that trade back and forth. We bring in what we don't make enough of, which is lean trim, about 75% of what we import, and we export the things there aren't a market for here in the U.S., whether that be tongues and offal or rounds or other cuts that can find a home in other markets. And we need that back and forth, but we are going to continue to raise serious concerns when that product coming in is coming from countries that we don't believe operate at the same quality level or consistency level or, quite frankly, honesty level that this industry does. We would consider Brazil to be in that bucket. We would consider Paraguay to be in that bucket, and we would absolutely consider Argentina to be in that bucket. We have a trade imbalance on the beef side with them of about 800 million to 7 million over the last 5 years in pounds of beef transferred both directions. So from our perspective, it is those issues rather than the simple fact of trim coming in from a foreign trading partner that's the root of our concern here. And that probably still is secondary to the market impacts of these announcements. Week over week, over the last couple of weeks, we have seen limit lock days We have seen folks have to make margin calls if they're in the futures market that are costing them money they weren't expecting to spend. And for our smaller producers that are the base of all of our grassroots organizations, it means they're locked out of tools like livestock risk protection. At a time when producers have just started embracing that product in the cattle supply chain, dating back to May of 2020, when the subsidies and the premiums for that program were adjusted in a way that it finally became more attractive to producers in the supply chain. So that's sort of where we see things at the current moment, Mr. Chairman. But I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about kind of where we are and where we think we're going.
Mr. Lane, I appreciate you very much. Question that I've got for you. You mentioned that we're at a 70-year low with the herd size. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we got to that point and why we're there at a 70-year low?
Yeah, I think there's a few different contributing factors. One of them is cyclical. We were at historic highs going into COVID. I think we all know that story at this point, right? Tremendous amount of market ready cattle, massive constriction in processing capacity. I think we spend a lot of time in this industry searching for answers that aren't supply and demand, when in a lot of instances that it simply is supply and demand. We're in the flip side of that now, where we have very low supply and that demand has remained very high. But producers across the country have experienced drought conditions. I'm from the Southwest. I'm from Arizona, although I was a Mississippi resident for 4 years when I was at school at Ole Miss. And I mean, I think we are seeing drought conditions. We're used to them in Arizona. We get 9 inches of rain where I'm from. Where we're seeing drought conditions that producers haven't dealt with, right? When you're talking about the Great Lakes, there was a D4 drought in Minnesota in the last couple years. In the Southeast, obviously. I'm watching closely to see if there's gonna be any ducks to shoot in Stuttgart in a few weeks when I get down there. There are a lot of places that have dealt with drought conditions that weren't used to dealing with that. That has had a massive impact and a headwind on herd size. Obviously, coming out of COVID, I think a lot of producers took a lot of damage. We see that generational transfer, 40% of operations transitioning to the next generation over the next 15 years. We've been talking about that for the last 10. And we still have that sort of headwind there, where the next generation is trying to decide whether or not it's worth going into those operations, it's worth growing them. And I think we're seeing some chafing there between, how dad and grandpa ran the operation versus how the son, who may be 30 or 40, or the daughter, is now wanting to take that operation. And what we're seeing in the meantime is kind of a failure to launch in those conditions, looking right for the whole family to agree, yeah, let's go make some acquisitions and let's grow this operation. Access to grazing land is a huge part of that equation as well. Out west, that is a federal land conversation. You heard the president and the secretary of agriculture talk about that in the plan that they released in the last couple days. I think our concern there is that there wasn't much in there for producers in other parts of the country. There wasn't a CRP component. If you go to Iowa or some of those places that were long sort of bastions of CRP, they've really turned on those tools primarily because they've started to become a tool for land investment, right? It's a way to cheapen up your hold on investment property, but that's having the effect of taking available grazing land out of circulation. So even if you did want to double clutch and increase your supply, if farm ground is too expensive to turn cattle out on, you're still at square one looking for some way to actually grow. So I think you've got a couple different storylines happening at once there, but I think the problem is none of them are sending a signal to our producers that even with that strong demand and high prices, that it's a safe environment to lean in and grow the herd. Because we joke about the fact that how do you even recognize a black swan if you just jump from black swan to black swan? And I think that mentality is certainly pervading producers' mindsets as well.
And you mentioned earlier, you're talking about the plan that USDA had rolled out on the cattle about fortifying the cattle herd into the future. Some of the discussions on that, I know that they stemmed with federal lands. Do you know if CRP land, because Mississippi, I'm not aware of any federal grazing lands that we have here, but I do know there's a large number of CRP land in Mississippi. Has there been any discussions on opening that up possibly?
So that was kind of what I was referencing. There in the lead up to this plan being released, we had seen some indications that that was part of their plan, and we indicated in the positive that that would be a very smart place for them to go. We don't have a good answer yet for why that didn't make the final product, but that's our feedback to them right now. Is you missed a big chunk of the country in not addressing that piece of this equation, because when we talk about unlocking grazing land, it's what that means in areas of the country with heavy use of CRP. You know, we've long had those conversations. I spent a lot of time on the ground in the Biden administration with USDA leadership trying to beat that into their head. You know, here's a field that's been taken out of production and is full of weeds and is going to burn, and here's a field that's been managed properly, and you tell me which one looks better, right? And which one is providing more benefit and is putting more ecosystem services in the ground. So we think we're on strong footing with that argument, and we don't think the administration disagrees. But that's what we feel, that's an area they missed and that they need to build out as part of this. We haven't had anybody tell us that they're not willing to do that, but we also don't know why it made the cutting room floor.
And also one more thing, if you're going to build the herd, I know heifer retention is going to be a huge part of that. We're not going to be importing mama cows, so we're going to have to grow them at home. Are there any discussions about incentives to push that producer to retain these heifers? Or because we know with the market conditions, with the high prices, people are moving those heifers. What discussions are you hearing about that, if anything?
Yeah, I mean that was the headline panic topic a couple weeks back. We suffered another round of market shocks because of that. The secretary indicated that she didn't actually. To be fair, I think this is one of those I want to be very precise with how I'm talking about it. She didn't say that, but she said she was going to put out a plan to revitalize the cattle industry, and that really set the internet on fire speculating about what that might mean. And it's one of those things where you want to do a study on how we're all sort of whipsawed by social media right now. That was a great example because, you know, she makes a comment that's pretty broad and high level. The internet invented a plan and we watched it happen, right? Cattle Twitter and Facebook and all these, I mean, they had details and it's going to be $1,000 a head and all this stuff, none of which was rooted in any real conversation we were aware of at the White House or USDA or anywhere else that would have indicated that that was a real thing. But man, there were people that are involved in the market that were calling us and saying, we're convinced, we know this is the plan. The secretary got enough of that she felt compelled to give remarks in Kansas City at a meeting where she said, look, there is no plan. We are not considering a heifer retention plan. We are going to let the free market work here, which is what our preference would be according to NCBA's policy book as well. We need to create the conditions economically that it makes sense for our producers to expand. But if we start paying people to retain heifers, we heard a lot of feedback from our members, and it was very consistent that that was something they were opposed to. From all corners of the country, the phone calls we received were, we understand the sentiment, but that is going to screw things up more than they are, and they need to work on making sure the conditions are right, that it makes sense, and that it pencils to retain those heifers and grow that herd. So that's a very long way of saying, I don't think there was any real conversation about that, or if there was, it was put to bed pretty quickly. But certainly the internet kind of ran with it and created in their own mind a program that was also roundly dismissed by producers, even though it wasn't real. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the state of that conversation over the last few weeks.
I appreciate you very much. Senator Barry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lane, for joining us today. And you kind of stole my thunder of getting to pick at you about attending Ole Miss and being the cattle guy here today. But thank you nonetheless. So I've got one kind of leading question and then other question. You mentioned the drought and the herd liquidations due to the drought several years ago, and we looked towards heifer expansion and growing the herd and think about the water issues out west and other parts of the country. We look at a state like Mississippi that has plenty of grass, a good climate, good water. Would you agree that Mississippi will be a great place to look to expand the herd of our cattle in the nation?
If my wife would agree, I'd be there. We're owning cattle outside of Oxford right now.
All right. One follow-up question. With the government shutdown, we miss cattle on feed reports. Would that have been helpful in any way over the last couple of days with the Trump tweets to have a little bit more information about where we're at in the feed yards, what we're actually sending out there?
we believe more information is always helpful to make sure producers have that information. You know, cattle on feed reports, cattle inventory reports, the elimination last couple years of that July cattle inventory report, and that being restored in the last year, we believe was welcome news. We believe sunlight and information are very important for producers to have all of the accurate information they need to make good decisions. We were very vocal internally leading up to the shutdown on the need to maintain market news and make sure that those guys were continuing to do that work that they do, getting that information out the door, so that producers have a full suite of information. I would say, as far as the president's decision making or internal decision making inside the administration, they have that information. We have provided more. You know, the economics surrounding this are not in a black box. They've been furnished. They've been available. Your Senate delegation and you know, Senator Hyde Smith in particular have been champions of making sure to educate from the president on down on the realities of this. And she deserves a tremendous amount of credit for that. You know, there is no shortage of accurate economic information, but you know, as we would say in our industry, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot force them to drink.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'll yield any other questions.
Anyone else to the committee? Senator Younger.
And thank you for attending this meeting with us, Mr. Lane. What, I've heard answers to this, but how hard would it be to put USA beef labeling on the beef that are come out of, you know, that we raise?
That's a great question. So it's not hard. You can do it now. And so, you know, obviously you're talking about the realm of sort of what has historically been discussed as MCOOL, mandatory country of origin labeling, and has now taken on a new sort of avenue with product of the USA labeling. And this is something that was really sort of brought to light in our policy process through the Oregon Cattlemen's Association, and actually a county meeting in Oregon some years back. I happened to be in the room at their state meeting when they passed policy to send to NCBA on this. In a former job, I was the head of the association that oversees our Western grazing producers, federal land access. So I was in that room, and I was there for that discussion, and it was really rooted in sort of, you know, people starting to figure out that for 30 some years, FSIS has allowed a kind of safe harbor program for labeling that basically says if your product passes through a USDA FSIS inspected facility, it then is suitable to bear the product of the USA label. And the way FSIS ran that program as open season, and we actually, as part of that policy process, once it was passed at NCBA, we commissioned a task force to look at this. It was 10 producers from across the country, led by Gene Copenhaver, a producer from Southern Virginia, who now is going to be our president-elect next year. And what they found during that process is an absolute unregulated mess at FSIS, where there were no employees at USDA that were keeping a list of who was using these labels. There were no employees that were working on enforcement or asking questions about how they're verifying what's in that package. And in fact, there was no verification of what's in that package, which from our perspective was completely inappropriate, not just as far as representing our producer's product in the package, but quite frankly, the expectation that any consumer in the country would understand what an American flag and product of the USA on a package means if it doesn't mean born, raised, and harvested, in our perspective, is completely unacceptable. We've engaged with USDA across multiple administrations now on that topic. That led to a rulemaking that was completed in the Biden administration, and one that we supported along with, I believe, all the other cattle groups, although I think everyone had kind of a slightly different take on that. And that is set to go live on January 1st. There was a 2-year sort of lead time on implementation of that new regulatory guidance from USDA, and I think the intention of that 2-year lead time was to allow the supply chain to figure out how they wanted to use that label. The new system going into effect now will keep that product USA label as a voluntary label, which means no one has to use it. But if you want to use this marketing label, you must now verify that it is a product that was born, raised, and harvested in the United States in order for to bear that label. We're now seeing the supply chain, and by that, I'm talking specifically about the end of the supply chain now, right? From packing to retail. Figuring out which retailers see value in that, which retailers feel that it's worth keeping that label and asking the packers, and by virtue of that, us, to take different compliance steps, whether that be more traceability or whatever else, to meet those standards in order to fill those programs, and whether there's a premium there that will be passed back to the producer to compensate them for that extra expense. That has always been the concern with MCOOL, is that it was a mandatory requirement, and the compliance costs of that fell to the producers. But there wasn't enough tangible economic benefit that came along with that for the producer to feel like the juice was worth the squeeze in what they were being asked to do. So that is the hope, is with this program, it's going to create more ability for those labels to be used in a strategic way that produces more premium value for the producer specifically in that transaction. If these programs only lead to, and this is the USDA estimate that they did a cost benefit analysis when they did this rule 2 years ago. And what they found as a part of that is that potentially there's a 10 cent per pound premium with that label. We don't know whether more development of markets surrounding those, and this is an important part of this, that rule also creates de facto state-based born, raised, and harvested labels, which means there could be a product of Mississippi label at a USDA inspected facility, plug and play out of the box with this label. We believe that's where there is a tremendous amount of untapped potential, because what we see from the consumer angle is a broad national label doesn't necessarily resonate. It certainly doesn't resonate at the same level as quality or price. And when they analyze consumer behavior, they actually, and this was news to me, but they actually have a system where they can look at consumers' eyes as they're looking at a beef package and see where their eyes go. And their eyes go to price, and their eyes go to quality. And they don't go to any of those other things on the package necessarily. But we believe that there's a lot of untapped potential, and we're seeing that in direct to consumer. We're seeing that in small regional labels, and we believe that hand in hand of developing more marketing options for producers, where they don't have to sell into the big four if they don't want to, but that small plant experience for them is not a consolation bracket either. It has to be at parity with premiums and quality of product and access to consumers that those producers are seeing if they play ball in that other value chain and sell into a U.S. premium beef or whatever that program may be. And we believe that this rulemaking, if it's implemented properly, and this has been our message to USDA, is you have got to educate producers, you've got to educate small packers, you've got to educate the supply chain about how to use this to create more value for producers, so that we have the early adopter, right, on one operation that's willing to go through those things and willing to get into a GAP 4 program or do something else. And that's great that they're willing to pursue those. But what we've missed in that equation is something for that producer next door that says, look, I'm not going to do all that, but I'll definitely sell into a program where I get a little kicker because my product would qualify for a product in Mississippi program. And so that's the hope, is that as this gets implemented, USDA takes the education component seriously, that they work to educate the supply chain about what possibilities are there. Certainly NCBA is planning to do that as well, and we want to work with our state partners on that. But we believe that's going to be an avenue to actually unlock some producer profitability out of this equation, because at every iteration of these origin labels, that's been the missing component, is where's our payoff for complying with this, having more regulatory expense in this process in order to facilitate this marketing label that the packers are enjoying and that the retail side of the equation is enjoying.
Thank you very much. Maybe we could call it bulldog beef.
I'm not familiar with what that mascot would represent, Senator, but I'm sure that it resonates in certain parts of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Lane.
I don't see any further questions.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've got a question, if you don't mind.
You're recognized.
Thanks, sir. Look, Mr. Lane, we appreciate you being here. My question is going to be more about, the fact that we've got farmers selling out right now, as they should be, if they're concerned about the longevity of their farm, their points where their prices are through the roof. But as your association, and I happen to be a member of it, thanks to Senator Berry encouraging me relentlessly to become a member of NCBA.
We thank you both.
Back in the days. But what are you expecting, and what are you seeing from your association to encourage the new generation to be there? Because right now we're seeing the sellout. We're seeing people getting the prices for their farms and for their cattle. And the guys and the farmers usually have suffered long enough. So they've had enough. They're at the point where they're trying to sell out. What are you seeing, and what is your encouragement? What can we do on a state level to encourage the younger generation to get back involved? And we know that the input cost for them to start over is going to be really ridiculous for them to start. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that if you can just address that for me.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm gonna take off my NCBA hat. I'm gonna answer that personally because I think that, and I alluded to this earlier, but this is near and dear to my heart. I am sitting in Washington D.C. and I've been here for 15 years. I like what I do because of who I do it for. I would probably have a hard time doing it for somebody other than this because this is not a fun place to be sometimes. It sure isn't right now. But I think across the country, you have multi-generational operations, and we celebrate those. But we all know what that dynamic looks like, right? Families, mine included, we've all made decisions about how to keep property together, how to keep assets together, how to continue to make sure that mom and dad and grandpa have the money they need to live and work, while also facilitating a life for that next generation that's now my age. I'm 47 years old, and I can tell you, my 86-year-old father still has a lot of opinions and cattle and horses and training my mom doesn't know about, and you know what I mean. And he's still making moves and very much believes that this is still his deal. And I think we're seeing that play out across the country in a way that is making it hard for a young producer to have the confidence to think through how they might do things differently, right? They're seeing angles that last generation didn't. And we joke about, you're never going to see something different if you haul your cattle to the sale barn on Wednesdays, because by God, we've gone to the sale on Wednesdays every week for the last however many generations. I think that we have not done enough work to really help those younger producers. And we always laugh about the band of young producers is a little gray in the ag industry, but how to help them have the confidence to say, look, I know we've done it this way, but I'm seeing angles that you didn't, and I'm seeing markets that weren't available, and I need the flexibility to take our operation in that direction, right? And I need the ability to unearth some new opportunities to market cattle, whether it's going after that premium or whether it's going after a niche, or, hey, I've got the social media background, which not every producer does, and we shouldn't expect that they're all going to be social media promoters, right, with a direct-to-consumer business. But the ability and the flexibility to engage in those markets in a way that wasn't available to our parents, and make sure they know that they've got the support and the research and the backing to say, I'm not just making this up, because we all know those coffee table conversations can be really difficult when you're selling your family on something that to them just sounds crazy. And I think we need to do a lot more to build that base of support around those younger producers, that they don't feel like they're out there with a wild idea for wanting to change how their family's marketing cattle or how they're engaging in this business in order to stay relevant and profitable. This isn't going to look the same way that it looked 20 years ago. It shouldn't. And I think that's where we need to be a lot more engaged there. And hey, look, this isn't just something we're paying passing mention to, but this is something that we're going to help you have the tools to do, right? We're building out. We just talked about Product of the USA labeling. What does that mean if I'm a young producer that's trying to decide whether it's worth me really doubling down and growing my herd to the point where I can make my living there, which we know maybe was 250 head a couple years ago. And it's probably north of 400, 500 head now, if we're being honest with ourselves, right? At the point where you don't need a job in town anymore. So what are the tools to make that a reality if you're not sitting in Western Kansas or in Iowa, where you go talk to those producers and they love to complain and they've got 7 packers to sell to, right? I guarantee you there's nobody in the state of Mississippi that's got 7 packers to sell to. So I think that's where we really have to be more thoughtful about how we create the kind of dialogue we've seen in the last week and a half, where everybody in the cattle industry wants to talk about the drama on Facebook and whatever else. How do we create that same buzz around, hey, look, this industry is going a lot of new directions, and all of them have the potential to be major market movers for us. We have the best beef on earth. You've never seen terror until you see a producer in Europe that's afraid that U.S. beef is going to be competing with them on grocery store shelves. Nobody can compete with what we produce, but we need to figure out how to make sure that our producers understand how to unlock that, and that they can sell their own families on the fact that that's the direction they need to go.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Lane, I believe that sums it up for us today. I don't see any more questions. We'd like to thank you again for coming. We appreciate the insight that you've given us, and just once again, thank you, sir.
My honor. I appreciate you guys having me.
Next, we have Mr. Dwayne Dunlap, President of DNS Commodities. I'd like to thank you for coming today and being with us, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak today. See the slides are up there. That's great. My name is Dwayne Dunlap. I live in Hernando. I own this little outfit, DNS Commodities, and what we try to do is come alongside ag businesses and renewable fuels companies and other stakeholders to kind of help them with their capital planning and strategy, their go-to-market strategy around the commodities and the marketing of the products and even the feedstocks that they buy. I'm a 2001 graduate ag econ degree from another state that starts with an ILM, but not Mississippi. I grew up in the Boot Heel in Missouri, but I've lived in Hernando about 10 years. I was asked to come to speak today a little bit about the China situation, in particular soybeans. Please interrupt me if you have a question as we go. I've got 7 or 8 slides here. I'll try to be respectful of your time and move fairly quickly. Some of this ground has been covered already by the other good speakers today. The first slide here is just a pie chart, and I just wanted to put it up here. I'm going to suppose that I can control this. Yes, I can. It's just a pie chart just to demonstrate the importance of soybeans to the state of Mississippi. So this is a pie chart of the planted acres on average over the last few years of the major row crops. And that big orange slice, if you want to call it that, is the soybean acres. Corn, rice, cotton, peanuts, all combined don't even add up to how many acres of soybeans are planted every year. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think a lot of the growers in here can speak to why that's the case. It's a good rotational crop and for other reasons. But I just wanted to put this up here to say that when we talk about row crops are struggling, the row crop industry and row crop farmers are struggling, soybeans are a massive piece of this. And as we'll see in the later slides, our export business and our export business specifically to China are a massive piece of this as well. Move quickly to the next slide. This is a USDA map of soybean production in the United States. And I only put this up here to show the blessing and the curse of where we are in the country. So incredibly intense row crop production across the Delta and in Mississippi, of course, but we're not like everybody else growing soybeans. You can see that. Our beans come off earlier. We're right on the river, right close to New Orleans. New Orleans is the #1 soybean export port in the United States. So when the export market is good, we do really, really well. And when the export market starts to suffer, we start wondering where we're going to go with our soybeans because our path at the bottom of the funnel there is south. Beans come off earlier here because of the climate, and we have the opportunity to harvest early beans. Historically, that's been a really good thing because the world was hungry for soybeans during early harvest, and we would receive early price premiums. I'm sure some of y'all remember that for early harvest soybeans. That's gone today. It's gone. Beans coming off in the Delta now don't have anywhere to go. So instead of being at a price premium early season, they're at a price discount early season, which just screws up the entire prospect of how you manage your fields and your farm and your crop and your rotations. This is me attempting to tell the story of what's happening with China. So there's a lot going on here. Let me unpack it on this chart. The blue line is Chinese soybean imports from 2001 until today per year. They are the story. You know, I graduated in 2001. China has been the macro trend for my career in agriculture and ag business. That and ethanol, corn ethanol. They've gone from importing about 500 million bushels of soybeans a year. For context, Mississippi is about 120 million bushels a year of production. So that's where they started in 2001. And there are 4 to 4.5 billion bushels per year today. And still growing. The orange bars is U.S. exports in all of those years. And you can see in the early years, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, the U.S. was exporting more soybeans annually than China imported. So they were sending beans to other places in the world, Mexico, or even to Canada, to Europe and other places. The green bar is the part of that orange bar that went to China each year out of the U.S. And you can see that green bar growing until 2016. You can very clearly see the first trade war with China in 2018 and 2019. I was on a soybean desk in those years. It was a very difficult time in this part of the world trying to find a market for beans. We also had a hurricane come through that created some real problems with quality, and it was just a compounding debacle that fall. However, I think the important thing to look at is since 2016, Chinese imports of U.S. beans have been trending lower. There's some ups and downs with different administrations or whatever, but the fact is imports of U.S. beans to China have been trending lower since 2016. And you look at that blue line, it's still going up. And the gap between the blue line and the green bar is all the beans they're buying from somewhere else, primarily Brazil. They've, as Mr. Kendall mentioned, they've invested billions of dollars in South American ports and railroads and infrastructure with an effort to diversify away from U.S. row crop dependency. And they're doing a good job of it, frankly. This is a trend that, in my opinion, doesn't change. Over time, China's demand is going to plateau. Their population is slowing down in growth or even shrinking a little bit. So their demand is not going to grow as fast as it has in the past, but the percentage of the crop that they're buying from the U.S., is not going to go up much, if any, from here, and likely it's going to go down. The other thing to mention is China is 60 to 65% of the global soybean market. So every bean that moves from one country to another, almost 2/3 of those beans end up in China. So we can't just diversify ourselves away from China with another export market, because for all intents and purposes, they are the export market. The difference between the orange bar and the green bar is the beans we're sending to other places. It's going to be difficult to get that difference much wider than what it is, because there's just only so many beans you can sell to Europe and North Africa and Mexico before they have all that they need. So it's a real dilemma for us in Mississippi and in the Delta, trying to decide where we go from here with our soybean crop, because we're just so keyed in. We have such an advantage going south to export, and that market is slipping away from us. And it has been for a decade. Make no mistake, this isn't a today problem. This has been happening for a decade, and it's just now getting the press probably that it deserves, so we can start to talk about what some potential solutions are. So to diversify away from exports, there's really one main use for soybeans, and that's to process it and turn it into these two products that are listed here. It's what China does. China takes soybeans, they process them, they create soybean meal to feed their hog herd primarily, and they create soybean oil to cook with. If we process beans here, it's the same thing. About 80% of the soybean by weight is animal feed, a high protein meal. It is a key ingredient along with corn in hogs and poultry, and also aquaculture like catfish. The other 20% is soybean oil. So soybean oil is used, you see it in the grocery store. Soybean oil, oftentimes, if you buy a bottle that says vegetable oil in the United States, that means soybean oil. Soybean oil is by far the largest cooking oil in the United States. Nothing else really comes close. It's about 12 to 14 billion pounds a year, which, to answer your question from earlier, about half of the soybean oil produced in the US is used in food. The other half today goes to biofuels. Biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel is a growing market for vegetable oils, including soybean oil. So when we think about how do we get away from exports, we have to think about these two products that come from soybean processing. And is there a plan and is there a place for those products in our state? This is an illustration here. This is a table of the 13 largest soybean producing states in the United States. Illinois is at the top. We are number 12 there. That first column with numbers is their production annually, and the second column is their domestic soybean processing capacity. We are the largest soybean producing state in the nation that does not have a processor. I don't think I need to say anything else. The notes to the side list 4 states that have expansions ongoing. There are a few other states that are smaller than Mississippi that also have some new soybean plants being built. We're in the middle of the biggest soybean processing capacity build out that the U.S. has seen in decades. Right now, we're about 3 or 4 years into it. There have been several new plants open the last couple of years, and several more are under construction or announced, but none today in Mississippi. But when we think about the products, again, Mississippi has demand for soybean meal. So the chickens and the hogs and the catfish in Mississippi consume about 1.4 million tons of soybean meal today already. We don't have to develop this market. It's a market that's already here. They're buying soybean meal from Illinois, from Iowa, from Missouri, a little bit from Alabama, a little bit from Arkansas. That 1.4 million tons amounts to 60 to 65 million bushels of soybeans. So more than half of the beans that we grow in Mississippi, if they were processed, could satisfy the animals that we need to feed in this state. We just need a processing plant. Last slide. I move fast and I'll have plenty of time for questions. Soybean oil. Soybean oil demand is strong and is growing primarily because of renewable fuels. So the current administration's EPA announced a couple months ago, 26 and 2027 proposed volumes for biofuels. They were very constructive, especially for biodiesel and renewable diesel, which is the vegetable oil piece of the business. I just have a few headlines there just for perspective on some of the things that are being talked about and announced in this industry. The chart that you see is the build out of the renewable diesel industry over the last several years, and you can see its growth has exploded. There's a lot to unpack in renewable fuels. It is a bowl of spaghetti. However, I think the big macro trend is you can see every year more vegetable oil is being consumed in biofuels year after year. It began with a federal mandate in 2005, the renewable fuel standard that kind of kicked off the ethanol business in the US, and also the biodiesel business at a slower pace. But it's turning into a lot more than that. It's turning into some states have their own programs that are requiring low carbon fuels. Renewable diesel and biodiesel fits the bill. Some of you bought a flight recently. You have the little button to click to offset your carbon. A lot of those carbon offsets are they're buying sustainable aviation fuel to fuel their jets to get a lower carbon feedstock. So it's not just a federal mandate that is driving this today. It's also some state rules. It's also some consumers and companies making the decisions themselves. And it's also international export business that is happening from some of these renewable diesel facilities that are being developed to produce the fuel and ship it overseas to meet other obligations somewhere else. So I think if I boil it down, we have the beans. Our beans are struggling to find a market. We have the demand for the meal. We could provide that meal to those poultry producers and hog producers and catfish producers. And we have growing demand for the oil. The only thing that we need is we need to find a place and a partner and someone who can buy into the opportunity that's sitting in front of us, in my mind, in Mississippi to begin processing some of our own products and keep some of the things that we grow in our state. This would be, in my mind, something worth looking at. What kind of questions do you guys, everyone have?
We'll start this off. And I'm gonna jump straight, go to the back and start working my way back forward. So you talked about the bio-renewable and the aviation fluid. Talk to us a little bit about the difference between the bio and the renewable fuels, because I know a lot of Midwestern states, they have these programs, as well as I believe California and Oregon, they have those programs that are pushing towards that. But tell me a little bit about what the difference in the bio and the renewable is.
Yeah, great question. So biodiesel is, so they're both replacements for diesel fuel. Biodiesel, renewable diesel, both replacements for diesel fuel. When you think about biodiesel, I think the simplified way to look at it, because I'm no chemist and don't pretend to be, but the simple way to look at it is the biodiesel plant is a relatively simple facility where you put the vegetable oil in, you put a little methanol in and a little catalyst, and on the back of it, it turns into biodiesel and glycerin. It's a relatively simple process. It creates this biodiesel fuel, which is a great fuel. It's got great lubricity, all these things. Renewable diesel production in the US is largely coming from old petroleum refineries that they are retrofitting to run vegetable oils, waste oils. You think tallow off the beef process, inedible tallow. They're running them through their cracker just like they would petroleum. And the thing that comes out is called renewable diesel, and it's pretty indistinguishable from diesel fuel. Biodiesel is a different molecule, but renewable diesel is pretty indistinguishable from diesel fuel. The thing that affects it in the marketplace, they both receive very similar style credits in the biofuel regulation space. You see the biodiesel industry started first and the petroleum industry wasn't interested because it was a competition. So the biofuel industry came about via agriculture. And a lot of the biodiesel plants are built next to soybean plants or canola plants. And they're right co-located next to them. And they're owned by the ag industry in large for the most part. Some of that's changed recently. But renewable diesel happened when the petroleum companies realized, we have aging assets and we have an industry that we've not participated in, and we can participate and we can do this well with this product, renewable diesel. There's also a little bit going on in California with their program that really drove some of those petroleum refineries in California to make the switch because their low carbon fuel standard is pushing out diesel fuel. So that's a little bit of the answer to the question. A biodiesel refinery may be 60 million gallons or 30 million gallons a year or 90 million gallons a year. A renewable diesel facility could be 500 million gallons a year. So the scale is just incredibly different. There are several renewable diesel plants along the Gulf Coast, whereas your biodiesel plants are in the Midwest a lot of time. But those renewable diesel plants could consume all the oil that we could possibly produce in Mississippi in a matter of weeks or months. Like this, the scale is just really impressive for an ag guy who's not used to the energy business. Sustainable aviation fuel is jet fuel, right? So it's run through that same cracker that renewable diesel is. They can make changes to the process to yield a little bit more jet fuel, sustainable aviation fuel, as opposed to renewable diesel. It's an oversimplified way of saying it, but it's a very similar process to renewable diesel.
All right. I'm gonna move towards the soybean processing plants. When you talk about the processing plants, and I agree, you made the mention because I know a lot of the crop is going to go to the Mississippi River, loaded out on barges, and it's going to go south. And if we can find a way to keep that product in state and utilize that, I think that will give us a lot more security within our agricultural markets today. The challenges of finding the processor or locating the processor plant, is it regulatory? What issues do you see that's hampering us from having that processing plant? Because I see we're at zero where all the other states have processing. What do you think that bridge is?
Yeah, there's a few things going on and a lot of it's legitimate. So there used to be a soybean plant in Marks, Mississippi. Bunge operated it, that closed, I think, in 2001. There's one in Little Rock, there's one in Helena, there's one in Memphis, and they've closed. They closed around the turn of the century as this ascendant China happened, because China was bidding them for beans, and they couldn't afford to run. Beans were cheaper in the Midwest, and it made more sense for those plants to shut down and just let these beans in this market go south where they wanted and needed to go. A few things have changed though since then. We have a lot more chickens now than we did 25 years ago in this part of the world, in Arkansas and in Mississippi, number one. Number two, we have a lot more beans than we used to. We have a lot more on-farm storage. Just in the 10 years I've lived in Hernando, the amount of on-farm storage built in the Delta is unreal. It's like every time I take a trip down, it's just, where did all this steel come from? So the industry, the farming industry down here has shifted to growing more beans, shifted to growing more corn, a little less cotton. They built a lot more on-farm storage. There's a lot more opportunities for this crop to be stored and sent to the soybean plant later on, whereas maybe 20, 25 years ago, it's harvest time, get it to the river, because by February, China's gone buying Brazil beans. So there was no incentive to store things. It was just to get it on the river and get it going. But a little bit of that DNA that's in the ag industry of these plants in the South didn't work 20 years ago. What's different today? That's a really easy button to hit. Say, can't work. It didn't work 20 years ago. But when you look at it and spend a little time on where are the feed mills that's using the meal? Where are the beans being grown? Can we find a place that is close in proximity with cheap trucking to these feed mills and also close to beans that are maybe a little further away from the river that has more trucking costs, a few more closed bridges to drive around? You can find a place or two to locate a plant that has the right logistics. But being able to get beans all year round will be a bit of a challenge. But good rail logistics, you could bring some beans in July or something like that from Illinois to kind of stem the tide until the harvest begins. But a lot of the challenge, a lot of the pushback on why there's not plants down here is just, man, you're right on that river. And when export markets are strong, we can't compete. The solution is get off the river a little bit, get close to your customers, and be realistic about what you're trying to accomplish. You don't need to build the biggest soybean plant in the world down here, but there's a place for a right size plant in my mind.
So you're not necessarily pointing to there's any regulatory burdens that are prohibiting this. This is just a fact that it didn't work a long time ago, and obviously the markets have changed. The whole way they operate has changed. So you're saying that now if we get off the river, that'll work.
Yeah, I think in my humble opinion, we've got a better opportunity to make this work now than we have since I've been in the business. That's for sure. The regulatory, I'm not aware of any, not my world. So I hesitate to say I know one way or the other.
Open the floor for any questions, committee. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Just a few questions, real quick. Is biodiesel being used or possibly being used with cargo ships? I mean, it seems like another area that a lot of fuels used. Is that something that you know if that's an opportunity?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Within cargo ships?
Yeah.
You know, we talked about aviation and different places where biodiesel is being
Yep,
used.
yep.
I just wondered if that's another area that there's potential growth.
So I know biodiesel is being used on tugboats up and down the river.
Okay.
Cargo ships, I don't know for sure. In some places, yes. But a lot of those cargo ships are using bunker fuel, which is a different animal.
Understood. One thing, and just curious if you have any knowledge, and just doing a high level, little bit of research the last night or two, what about asphalt? And in that arena with soybean oil and things are being used, is that viable at this point? I know there's some things that can be done, but is it cost effective at this point, or do we see a growth in that particular space over time?
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing, by soybean oil is 50 cents a pound, plus or minus. When you roll that up to a cost per barrel and compare it to a lot of petroleum products, it's quite expensive. So functionally, yes, you can. It can work in places in asphalt. I think extreme high weather, you'd have a little bit of trouble with it, hot weather. But it can work, and it has worked in places. I think it comes down to a cost thing. We have social incentives to use biofuels in our cars, but not on our asphalt.
I understand. I figured it's an economic question at this point, just not there.
Yes, sir.
One last thing, and you may have explained this, and I just didn't catch it, but it seems that we're sending all our soybeans overseas and they're sending them back to us, theirs to us. We're just passing in the Pacific. Why is that?
Yeah, so we're not importing soybeans. We're just exporting, but we are seeing some imports of used cooking oil from other countries.
Okay.
To satisfy biofuel mandates. So I think the president mentioned something about we're going to stop Chinese cooking oil. What he was really talking about was used cooking oil, which is a waste oil that can be used in biofuel processes. That's a whole nother bowl of spaghetti around, is it really waste oil or used, or is it new, or and all those different things. But that's one piece of it. I think we don't have a whole lot of imports except seasonally, like really late summer and a crop that if we had a bad crop, you may
Okay.
see soybean meal come into the East Coast to satisfy like Carolina hog farmers or something, because it's cheaper than getting Midwest soybean meal for a season.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dealing with the biofuel process, without federal subsidy or carbon credit, the process itself, if Trump was, or the federal government was to do away with the subsidies altogether, how cost competitive or price competitive would the biofuel from soybeans be versus crude oil?
Yeah, so biodiesel is for sure more expensive. There's no getting around that. I think the way I've thought about it is in this picture. You're making two things, and farmers have a cost of production. And if soybean oil has to go down in price to become cost competitive with no subsidies into biofuels, because we're not going to go eat twice as much salad dressing as we used to, just because the biodiesel subsidy goes away. But we need the meal to feed our chickens and to feed our hogs. So if the biofuel subsidy goes away, what you may see is the bean oil price goes down to find that place where we can export or we can do something else, and even still use some for biofuels demand. But what's going to happen is that meal price is going to go up because it can't stay on the same price because you're just making the farmer price cheaper. And farmers aren't going to grow beans much cheaper than this. So you have this co-product play going on where the biofuel mandate is helping the price of soybean oil for sure by creating this demand for a product that's a little more expensive than diesel. But it's also helping keep the price of soybean meal down. And that's one of the main ingredients in chickens and the pork and the poultry that you buy in your grocery store shelf. So it's a way to kind of help offset costs to feed out chickens and keep grocery store prices low via this biofuel mandates. It's convoluted, I know, but it's a fact. Those two things come out of the bean. And if we need the meal, the oil's got to go somewhere.
But bottom line, what would be the percentage of variance between crude oil and a non-subsidized?
Yeah, so today it's somewhere in the $1 to $2 a gallon difference. And that is paid for via a renewable credit mechanism that the refiners have to pay.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
We talk about a new facility and there's risk in anything you do. And Senator Seymour alluded to part of my question was, subsidies change from federal government. How does that affect a plant? But also when I think about a new plant, say, you started next year building a new plant somewhere in Mississippi, being it's newer, would it have any type of competitive advantage for being more efficient as opposed to some of those other plants that are running? Would it be, I guess, cheaper to run than some of the other ones? I guess just trying to offset the risk. I'm trying to kind of put my mind, is newer better and that type of thing, or is it just basically you're crushing them regardless, and it's not great technology to do that?
Yeah, so technology has certainly improved, and it would for sure be more efficient than some of the older plants. Some of the oldest plants today are, they're 60 years old, so they're getting pretty long in the tooth. With all this expansion going on, there has been a plant or two closed that was operating and chose to close because they couldn't stay competitive. So there is some of that capitalism going on, driving out the less efficient plants because the new plants are just more efficient. A lot of that has to do with getting your scale right. It doesn't make sense to build a real small plant. The standard plants today being built are about 4,000 tons a day, which is about 40,000 bushels per day of processing capacity. And that's kind of the cookie cutter plant that's been built the last few years. That may be a touch big for us. But certainly we can still get close to that scale to have enough efficiencies to make sense.
Any further questions from the committee? Mr. Dunlap, I think that sum it up. I appreciate you coming in today. And I'll get with you after this meeting, exchange numbers. I'd like to talk to you about some other things.
For sure. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have with us today, Mr. Mark Leggett with the Poultry Association, Mr. John Gordon Campbell with Southern Crop Producers. You have Mr. Frank Howell, Mr. Clint Dunn with Delta Council, Mr. Mike McCormick with Farm Bureau. If any one of you would like to come up and speak or say anything, we would be more than happy to hear from you. I just wanted to give that opportunity if any of you wanted it. I believe that is going to conclude this hearing. I appreciate everyone coming, especially the presenters. For a motion? Well, that's important.